So welcome as you all are entering into the webinar. As you enter, if you could take a moment and in the chat, enter your name and where you're from. And also if you want to add whether you're a farmer or if you grow botanicals, or if you work for a botanical company that does have a farm or is thinking of having a farm, that would be great. And when you enter that information in the chat, make sure to say to everyone. Otherwise, it just goes to the panelists. I'll wait another moment or two and then we'll get started. So again, welcome if you're just joining now. And if you want to take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat, say where you're from, what part of the botanical sector you work in, if you are in the sector, if you're a student or an herbalist or a researcher. This will just help us get a sense of who's out there and who we're speaking to. Thanks.
I see some people I know.
Sorry?
I see some people I know in the chat showing up.
Welcome.
Hi, friends.
So I'm going to go ahead and get started and welcome everyone to, I think it's like the fourth in the series of webinars for the Sustainable Herbs Program Toolkit on best practices in the botanical industry around bringing sustainable and regenerative practices into the dietary supplement industry. So it's well known that we can't be well until the earth is well. And in the same way, the finished products are only as well as the ecosystems that are part of creating them. And the three speakers that we have today are all individuals who believe this and work for companies who this is really the central premise, that the health of the product is only as good as the health of the ecosystems and the soil and the communities. And so it's one thing to say that. We can all believe that. It's much, much harder to put that in practice. And yesterday at the Regenerative Rising Summit, Dina Prater from Danone said, it can feel very incremental. It can feel very farmer by farmer, acre by acre. And so one of my objectives today is really bringing forward some of the amazing work that these three companies are doing to sort of see the progress that's being made and give a sense of, okay, there is being progress. We are making progress. And also then sort of underscore the urgency to build momentum so that more progress is made. We've had over 600 people register for this webinar, which is a fantastic amount of support. And so our hope is really that you take away concrete tools and practices, as well as inspiration to sort of put these practices to work. And so I want to just share a slide that shows the other webinars that we're going to have coming up. And as I figure that out, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Here we go.
It's fun to see people coming in from all over.
So can you see my screen now? Okay. So this, as I said, is in the series on the toolkit. And on January 21st, I'm really excited for a webinar that we're having. So the idea is really to bring in different perspectives. And so this will be a conversation with producer groups, one from Nepal, one from India, and one from Peru, really to bring in different voices and different perspectives. So those of us who can't travel can really hear from different stakeholders. And they'll be talking about the challenges in particular that COVID has caused, but also more broadly, just what it means to be at that level of the supply network for botanicals. And then we're also envisioning doing several other on this track of regenerative practices around different size farms. And I want to thank Jackie Greenfield for her help really thinking through how to bring conversations around regenerative practices in farming into this work. And I invite your input if there's specific farms you'd like to hear from or tools and techniques. You can either enter those in the chat or you can contact me via the Sustainable Herbs Program website. And then I'm also really excited about this other series, which is the ethnobotany series. And next week I'll be speaking with Nancy Turner, Dr. Nancy Turner, an ethnobotanist, and Lee Joseph, who was a student of hers, who is now getting her PhD. And they've been working together really around using indigenous plant knowledge to regenerate that knowledge in indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest, and really looking at the relationship between Western science and indigenous knowledge. And then those themes will continue in the series that we have in January and February. And I wanted to thank our sponsors. These webinars were available, we're able to make them available for free because of the generous support of our underwriters. All of the companies who are speaking today, as well as a number of other companies. We're very grateful for that support, as well as the support of ABC members. So you can find more information on all of these companies on our website. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to the speakers. And Bethany Davis will be speaking first. And Bethany Davis, probably, none of these people probably need an introduction, but I'll just say a few words. Bethany is the Director of Advocacy, Social Impact, and Government Relations for MegaFood. She serves on the Board of Trustees of American Botanical Council and of APA, and she's also on the advisory group for Sustainable Herbs Program. And Bethany is a real champion for regenerative agriculture and sustainability and transparency, and has been quite involved in the Soil Carbon Initiative, as well as a lot of other initiatives. And so I'll turn it over to Bethany now.
Thanks, Anne. Hi, everybody. I've got some slides to share. So yeah, regeneration. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we do regenerative agriculture as a company. So, and it's really more than the actions that we're taking. It's more of a mindset. And as I get into this, I think you'll understand a little bit more about what that means. I'm Bethany, that's me, that's picture of me voting this year. I cover everything related to advocacy and social impact and government relations at MegaFood. A little bit about MegaFood. We're a whole food based multivitamin mineral company, botanical company, and we make really high quality multivitamins largely, but also herbal products. And we use food, we use real food, and we have partnerships with farmers to make our products. And we make most of our products are all made in New Hampshire here where we're based. We're B Corp. We have a lot of cool certifications like Non-GMO Project and Organic, but what we're really focused on is the regenerative movement. This is our manifesto. And if you work for a company and you're trying to figure out what you stand for and how you're going to make decisions, where's everything ladder up to? This is the stuff that we really care about. These are the things that we want to do. These are the things that we want to change in the world. When we think about these issues, we see an opportunity to become the solutions in these spaces. And so this is sort of our true north as a company. About 5 years ago, I went to Costa Rica with some friends, and we went to a farm there called Finca Luna Nueva. And a person named Tom Newmark walked me around this biodynamic, regenerative organic farm and told me a little bit about the state of things. And by the state of things, I mean the state of soil health globally. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I'll tell you, I got pretty upset. I felt a lot of urgency, and I was triggered. I was deeply concerned. He was telling me that, yeah, most of the world's soil is in a state of being deteriorating over time, and that the UN had said that in less than 60 years, less than 60 harvests, that we're going to run out of topsoil. We're destroying our topsoil globally in such a way that we won't be able to grow food on average 60 years from now. And that report was 5 years ago now. And I have to tell you, I felt a really strong urgency. And I came back, MegaFood, we'd always been involved in organic. Our products are organic. We buy organic agricultural materials. And we were always thinking about farming practices and what was important to us, but the thought of an urgency around regenerating the soil, that was the first time I really had that awareness. And I came back to the company and I was like, hey guys, I learned about something and it's pretty much the most important thing we've ever heard, so we need to reorganize. And I'll be honest, at the get-go, I was so reactive and scared about the state of things, that I was just like, we just got to change this. We got to do whatever we need to do. And what I have come to since sort of engaging in the regenerative space and the people in that space, and even just engaging with myself about why am I doing this work and what does it mean to me? I've come to realize that a lot of change wants to happen. And I ask myself, from what place am I wanting to create that change? And that's what we as a company actually ask ourselves as well. And so we've kind of had a change, and we've always been a company that was out there pushing for things and championing things. And really what we've come to now is that we want to do our own interior work to make sure that we're coming at change from a place where we're not reactive, that we're more responsive than reactive, and that we have a clear vision for the future that we want to see, and that we're kind of participating and co-creating that, and that we're not in a state of blame about this is all the giant problems with this current system, and this is why it's failing, and this is why you guys are all wrong and why we're right, because that's just kind of more of the same. And so we've had a mindset shift around regenerative and what that word means to us, and it's really a consciousness shift. And so a big part of our work internally as a company is checking, where are we? Where are we coming at all the different initiatives and the partnerships that we are engaged with? Where are we coming from with that? What is our mindset? And I think that it ties in with the whole concept of regenerative agriculture. I think any type of change you're trying to create in the world, any type of advocacy or activism that you're doing, those are important questions, but especially around regenerative ag, because we're actually talking about a holistic system. We're talking about all the interconnectedness. It's not us versus them. Actually, the whole system of regenerative is about the whole. And so whenever I notice the urgency and almost the panic and fear set in around what are we doing here globally? What's happening? You know, when I see the news and I see fires and I see what's going on, it's easy for some panic to set in. And that's the time when I slow down. And as a company, when MegaFood will slow down to actually check and see where we are. And there's this really beautiful quote by Bayo Kamalafe, sort of a thought leader, in like the it's like a non-dualistic approach to climate change almost, that he talks about. He says, these times are urgent, let us slow down. And I think what he means there is like, let's slow down and check and think about what our mindset is as we go out to try to create change in the world. And what's really exciting is that there's so much hope. I mean, just the fact that there's 600 people registered for this webinar today, and the fact that this is the second time I've spoken to a group of people this week about this. There's a movement that is happening, and a moment here where there is so much potential. And we know so much more than even we did 12 months ago about what the potential for regenerative agriculture really is. And you guys may have seen this Rodale white paper that came out this year in September. It was released, but basically saying we can do this. We can reverse climate change. And what's beautiful about this movement is it's not just about reversing climate change. It is about that. And it's about feeding everybody. And it's about everyone having access to nutrition and botanicals so that they can live their healthiest life. But it's really about even more than that. It's about how do we handle farm labor? What are our practices? You know, what about water practices? And so it's this really holistic mindset shift, and there's a path forward. And so it's a really exciting time. I try to, when I feel the fear, I try to wonder, like, how can I actually move that into kind of some excitement instead of reactive fear? And that's kind of what we're doing as a company as well. And how do we do that? As a company, how do you do that? There is so much work that wants to happen. There's so many things that want to change, and there's so much opportunity to do that change. As a company, if I could give you one piece of advice, if you are at a company or own a company where you want to work on regenerative agriculture, if you want to move that movement forward, rather than doing a little bit of everything and getting easily distracted, I want you to ask yourself, what is uniquely mine to do? And when MegaFood sat back and said that, well, what are we really good at? We're pretty good at advocacy campaigns. We're really good at relationships, and we're good at education. And so these are sort of our sweet spots. These are our zones of genius as a company. And so that's what we have set out every year, that we set our principles and our projects around those things. And so what does this movement look like at MegaFood? In a practical sense, in a less esoteric sense, it's these three pillars. We want to regenerate agriculture, we want to champion equity, and we want to shrink our footprint. And so these three principles, this is our 5-year strategic plan. This is what everything funnels through. We have our manifesto, which is sort of our North Star, and this is the funnel. And if it doesn't hit one of these, we're probably not going to do it because we just want to spend as much time and focus on what we're good at and where we can make a real impact. This is what it looks like this year. So this year we launched a farm trial. We wanted to have a more clear understanding. We believe that healthier soil leads to more nutrient dense and more botanically powerful foods and herbs. And there wasn't really enough peer-reviewed journal like research for us to go and make that claim and say, hey, regenerative foods are more nutritious. Regenerative botanicals are more powerful and more potent. And so rather than seeing that as a big problem, we said, okay, rather than whatever we notice missing out there in the world, how can we become that? So we partnered with Kauai Organic Farm in Hawaii. And I've got another slide on this, but we're doing a 5-year soil trial. So this is actually, this picture here is of the turmeric farm. That's part of our test plot, but we're looking at different regenerative practices and actually comparing both the health of the soil and the nutrient density of the food that's grown in that soil, a 5-year study, which is really exciting. And we've got some other programs here, a farmer relief program. When COVID hit, we don't really see ourselves, we don't see our farmers as victims, and we don't see ourselves as coming in to swoop in and save. But what we do see is that there's no difference between the helpers and the helped. And when COVID hit, some of our farmers were struggling. And so we really quickly were able to put together what we called a farmer relief fund, which is just like, hey, do you guys need any help? And we were able to move on that really quickly and provide dollars so that farmers could get food in the ground at the beginning of the year, even when there was new restrictions and new things to figure out about with COVID, with that impact. And we also have some advocacy campaigns. We're doing a lot of work on the ground level at the state level on policy and soil health. But I'm going to go into a little more detail. This is our farm pilot in Kauai. And we're looking at single species cover crop, multi-species cover crop, and then using like bioactives, essentially compost, in all different plots of land to see what's the difference with soil. And I know Anne said that we're pretty involved with the Soil Carbon Initiative, which is true. And so we're using the Soil Carbon Initiative Index in order to do all this soil measurement. And we hope to publish the results of this. We're also looking at labor and costs. Does this save me money? What are the yields like? So that we'll have really rich data and information to share with the world on this important crop. This is a note from Foster Farm Botanicals. We source 6 or 7 different herbs from them. They're in Vermont, which is right next to New Hampshire, where MegaFood's based, and they were able to they needed some help, and we were able to give them some cash in March so that they could make it through this sort of chaos caused by COVID hitting and get all their crops in the ground, which we're happy to do. And that we only even knew that that was a need because we have close relationships with the people that we buy ingredients from. Another key aspect of what we do is called the Healthy Farm Standard. This has 3 principles. It's focused on building the soil, conserving resources, and creating thriving livelihoods. And it's essentially a scorecard. So we're going to our key partners, our key farmers, and saying, can we get this data from you? So that, one, we know what's going on in our own supply chain, and so that we can sort of stand for and have full transparency on everyone that we buy materials from. But also, can we have a conversation about what are your challenges? Is there a way for MegaFood to support you? And in some cases, we even are able to offer incentives. So if they're trying to move towards a regenerative practice, but they need a new piece of equipment, or they need a consultant to come in and give them some data, or they need a training, often those are things that MegaFood can actually pay for and incentivize our supply chain to move towards these practices. This is a key part of how we're progressing this movement. And champion equity is another really important part. So we are a vertically integrated company. So we've got several hundred people that work in New Hampshire, actually physically making our products, packaging them, mailing them out, doing the manufacturing process. We have a lab where we do testing. And we wanted to make sure that everyone had what they needed. And so we took a look at the New Hampshire living wage data, and we make sure that every employee that works for us gets at least 25% more than what is considered the living wage in the state at a minimum. And now we're moving this sort of thinking out into our supply chain. So we're working in a couple of ways. We're working with a company called SEDEX that does audits all over the world for different ingredient suppliers, so that we can not just ask people what their practices are around labor, but we can have audits done so that we can kind of confirm that we know what's happening on a farm level and on a manufacturing level all over the globe, which is amazing. And also our Healthy Farm Standard is going a little deeper. We were already asking all of the necessary questions required by law for us to understand about labor practices in our supply chain. But now we're going a little bit deeper, and we're asking people, do you pay people overtime? Do people have holiday time? Do you provide healthcare? And getting a lot more information about what's happening at the policy their policies for their on-farm labor. And although I think MegaFood's done a really good job of talking about the soil health part of regenerative agriculture and educating people around that, what I think we haven't done enough on is the people part of regenerative agriculture, and just taking a look at the fact that, I mean, a lot of our suppliers are in the US, but the fact that this is largely stolen land that was cultivated by slaves and is now maintained by migrant workers who do not have the same labor protections that citizens have in this country. And so that's what we're looking at right now, and we don't have a solution. And that's part of what I mean by a mindset shift. I feel reactive when I think about our food system and the fact that we're so reliant on migrant labor that it doesn't really feel equitable the way that our migrant labor is functioning in our country right now. And we don't know what the solution is. And we're still going to explore it, and we're still going to talk about it publicly, and we're still going to sort of we're basically doing a big research project to say what's happening here and what are some ways that we can develop more equity in the supply chain. So starting at home, and then with our suppliers, and then the world at large, that's kind of the ripple effect of how we think about making change. This is just a little bit about how MegaFood does or is regenerative agriculture in the world, but we invite you to join us. And I'm really appreciative for Anne and the Sustainable Herbs Project for giving us a voice in this conversation for all of you guys. And I'm really happy that you all were able to join. and listen. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Bethany. Two key things. One, I'm really glad the way you framed it, because you don't just have to be a farmer as a company to make a huge difference, both in the conversations and in the actual work. And when I was traveling to farms doing the work for the Sustainable Herbs Project, before it became part of ABC, the one thing nobody would really talk about was who the farmers were. And that's the one thing I couldn't really talk about, was the migrant farm. I couldn't take pictures. And so I'm really grateful to hear that you all will begin breaking that conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be a big focus for us.
So there'll be time for questions in the last 15 minutes or so. For now, I'm going to turn to Matt Dybala, who is earned his degree in environmental studies in 1998. And since then, he's dedicated to fostering a deeper connection between humans and the natural world. And for the past 10 years, he's been the farm manager at Herb Pharm in Southern Oregon, where he focuses on building the soil with biological soil building practices, biodiversity assessment, and carbon capture principles, where they're really fostering on-farm resiliency. And I look forward to hearing from Matt. And Herb Pharm, as he'll say, also is part of, has been a pilot for the Regenerative Organic certification. And I imagine Matt will talk some about that. But welcome, Matt. Glad you can join us.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly. Hopefully this will work. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Is that coming through okay? Okay, great. So just before we jump into my talk, thanks, Bethany. I just want to dovetail onto your work, because I took the Healthy Farm Standard last year, and it is a very challenging. It asks some really good questions, and I'm not sure who everyone was that put that together, but I thought you got to some really poignant parts of farming that are really difficult questions to want to answer, even as a farmer. So that's kind of why we're all here today, and what we want to keep doing moving forward. So thanks for that work. And so today I'm going to really talk about our work from a farmer perspective. I see a lot of folks that I've collaborated with on this call, and I see a lot of farmers and growers raising their hands. So it's really awesome to see the support right now for this information. Really quickly, again, like Anne had said, I've been working with Herb Pharms for 14 years now, and Herb Pharm goes back to 1979, and we've got a long history of basically ethos around what we do, and a lot of that starts with really what we call stewardship, and that's a couple different factors. One is that we've been in the herbal industry for 40 years, and we've never strayed from the stewardship of our quality of our product that we offer to consumers, and also our stewardship of our community. We're located in a small rural community in Williams, Oregon, and we still remain there today, 40 years later. And it is a very small rural community. And then for my touch point has been the stewardship of the land, which with Herb Pharm starting really with a humble small half-acre garden, and then slowly moving into the organic industry and into organic farming. So it's really been a 40-year commitment on the farm to basically restrict the use of pesticides, herbicides, and just really challenge ourselves with the best organic practices available. But I would say that that has evolved just over the last 5-10 years with a lot of things, particularly with farming in relation to climate. And again, like Bethany said, it really starts with your leadership. It has to start at the very top. You have to have support for this type of this type of approach to farming and agriculture. And so it really starts with a commitment. We wanted to really make a stance on global change, global climate change. And we really wanted to actually have a direct response to some of the recent studies that are coming out linking agriculture to some of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. So let's just get to the really nasty stuff first. I mean, nitrogen dioxide, methane, and carbon dioxide. Those have all doubled in the last 100 years in our lower atmosphere. They're trapping heat in the planet, and agriculture is a major contributor, one of the top contributors industry-wide of these gases in our atmosphere. Methane in particular for holding mass livestock in small areas, CAFOs, and nitrogen dioxide from the manufacturing synthetic fertilizers, and then the later application of commercial fertilizers, and then carbon dioxide, which has really to do with really poor soil practices over the last 100 years. So we've really been really busy over the last 100 years doing a lot of damage. And so how are we going to reverse that? So we'll get to that. I guess one thing I have here is a photo of, again, just our going back to really our relationship to the land and to the plants going back 40 years. It's inherent in what we do at Herb Pharm. We grow 80 of our own ingredients, and we manage over 250 acres, certified organic acres. And so that puts us in direct connection with the plants from seed to harvest, really. So it really gives us a really tangible experience of what's happening in our landscape, in our land, in the plants, and in the soil. So, and it gives us a lot of opportunities to work directly with the plants themselves, like this picture of wormwood here, where again we can kind of dictate when you have that experience with the plants directly, you can use the parts like wormwood. This is a 6-foot tall plant, but we're only harvesting maybe the top 12 inches or so to go after the really potent flowering tops. And again, you can see the background here, how dry it is. Wormwood is a Mediterranean type plant, drought tolerant. So we can use those types of plants in those types of settings where we do have a lot of lack of water or dry land type farming. So we have a lot of, when you have a farm and you start growing your own herbs, you have a lot more ability to kind of manage how you want to go about that. So really what it started with about 2-3 years ago was a commitment to make a real clear statement on how we want to progress. And so again, the idea that we're going to be storing the land, we want to leave it in better condition than where we found it 10, 20, 30, 50 years down the road. So what we decided to become involved with was a pilot program that started last year, Regenerative Organic Certification, and it gave us some really good metrics to really start looking at what is our impact on our soil and on carbon sequestration and just the biodiversity of our farm. So I'm going to jump right into that because I know this is really the nitty-gritty of what we're here for. I put together for myself, about 5 different definitions of regenerative agriculture that's out there right now. As I think right now we're defining regenerative agriculture in a lot of different ways. I think if you look at the top one, a system-based approach to agriculture, focus on finding balance between people, planet, and economy. That's a really simple, but I think when we get to the end of my presentation, that this might be the most sensible approach to regenerative agriculture. But then, of course, you've got some other definitions. I think I'm not going to read through all of them, but an interesting one was J.J. Rodale down at the bottom. That's on the Rodale Institute's page. That they have a video of J.J. Rodale in 1989 that talks about regenerative agriculture, and he just mentions simply that regenerative agriculture is a conversion into a low input system, and that's really what he defines it as. So, and he warns people to stay away from the term sustainable unless you're more of like a policymaker, not quite applicable maybe to farming or too broad in a sense. But what we got involved with was regenerative organic certification. We were in a pilot program last year, and there's really 3 pillars to this certification. Again, it really breaks it down quite simply. Increases soil organic matter over time, and sequesters carbon below and above, which could be a tool to mitigate climate change. Improves animal welfare, and provides economic stability and fairness for farmers, ranchers, and workers. Okay, so let's jump right into the carbon sequestration and the soil testing. So these are all these concepts are basically separate from organic certification. So everything I'm going to be talking about are basically concepts that aren't necessary. They're not required to be certified organic, but they are required for this certification to be certified regenerative. It's important to know that for this certification program that we're in, the baseline requirement is organic certification. So you have to first be an organic certified farmer. So this is really applicable to someone that is already organic certified or is moving down that pathway. There's a lot of great carbon sequestration farming practices and resources for folks that are doing conventional farming, but this is really particular for organic farming. It's a baseline. But the big one is the metrics on lab testing for your soil. And again, this takes us a little bit completely away from traditional soil testing, which is really a nutrient analysis. Most farmers are familiar with testing their soil to figure out how much nitrogen they need, how much, what their pH is, what their organic matter looks like, how much boron they need, how much phosphorus, potassium, things like that. But this has nothing to do with nutrient analysis. This type of soil testing is done by the same labs that will do your nutrient analysis, but you're looking at really 4 things in your first year in the program. Number 1 is the level of organic carbon in your soil. So you have to measure that first. And the second metric is your bulk density compaction, which is air. Textbook soil, 25% air. 25% water, and then 45% minerals, and then at least 5% organic matter, hopefully even higher. So again, that air and oxygen in your soil is very important. And it's important actually to increase carbon. You need to have oxygen in your soil. So bulk density, soil texture is one that's done in the first year just to determine what kind of soil you have, sandy, silt, clay. That's all going to determine what your capabilities are for storing carbon, and then pH as well. So organic carbon is probably the crux of this, and it's just some interesting tests. There's some that I had never done before until I was part of this program. One is looking at soil protein levels, which is basically calculating the amount of food available for your microorganisms. The other one is active respiration, which is another test that you can perform in your soil. And that's going to tell you the health of your microorganisms, how much your soil is respirating and the microorganisms are alive in your soil. There's microbial biomass metrics too. So there's a lot of great tests involved. The other one is a biological infield soil health assessment. This is probably the most interesting and most exciting for farmers, because you get to go and do this yourselves. You don't need to go out to a lab to do this. I showed this total picture here because it gives you a good sense of where we need to learn about how we treat our soil. This is a good example of compaction and driving on soil when it's too wet. The types of activities you want to avoid to build regenerative carbon sequestration of your soil. So this assessment is done in the field. So the types of tests you do in the field are compaction. You go out and poke a hole in the soil and see how deep you can go and how loose your soil is. And we use a penetrometer to measure the PSI of compaction. You're looking for crusting on top of your soil, and you're looking for macro life diversity. You're actually taking these samples from a specific part in your field. And it's important that you have to actually keep track of your GPS coordinates, because 3, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, you need to go right back to that same spot and assess, how are you doing? You know, are you building macro life diversity? Are you eliminating compaction? Are you building organic matter, or are you going the other direction? And so macro life diversity is a big one. It's fun. You just get to count the number of worms and mycorrhizae and larvae that you find in a handful of soil at these locations. And then you look at your vegetative cover percentage using a 10-foot transect. You assess your plant health and root growth, and then aggregate stability. You put a clump of soil in a jar of water and see how quickly it dissolves. If it dissolves quickly, then you're probably over-tilling your soil, because again, that glue that binds the soil together for aggregate stability is necessary for if again with better soil practices where you're not disturbing the soil. Another benchmark is vegetative cover. In this program, you need to have well, it has to do with crop rotation and vegetative cover. The minimum is 3 crop species per rotation in the specific area. For and this certification has multi-levels of bronze, silver, and gold, so you can keep going as far as you want. I mean, we got certified at the silver level, but that gives us much more to work on to achieve that gold standard, which is very difficult. 4 crop rotation or 7 crop rotation. That means you don't get back to your same rotation until after growing 7 different species in rotation. The other one is vegetative cover. You have to have 50 to 75% year-round cover, or 75% or more for gold. So there's a big emphasis here. You can see our picture. This is really important for Oregon. You can see the leaves are off the tree. You can see the rain coming in, snow up in the hills. So winter cover for mostly erosion, topsoil erosion is important. So you can see how nicely our cover crop really commits you to getting that soil covered before the winter in our climate. Cover crop diversity, something that Bethany talked about, something that really we looked at really closely, and we just started diversifying our cover crops. You know, we were up to 17 different species in our cover crop mix right now. So in the picture on the right, you can see, you know, just again the amount of pollinator habitat, insect habitat, reptiles, amphibians, you know, that this biodiversity. There's another study that came out that will show that carbon levels will increase with the biodiversity of roots. So if you have the more different types of root structures you have in your soil, the more carbon you could possibly sequester and keep in your soil. Because of the porosity, the different roots will all create different types of pockets for organic matter and different organisms. So, and then here on the left is a legume. I've got yellow sweet clover coming out, red clover, there's alfalfa, there's like 3 legumes in there. And if you look up in the right hand there, the sky, it's you know, 79% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. That's what plants mainly need to grow. And those legumes do the work for us. They convert atmospheric nitrogen into usable nitrogen by crops by growing them in the soil. So we're really having a lot of fun with diversifying our cover crops. The other ones that we're putting in there are something like, we're using a lot of daikon radish and big turnip that get huge. I mean, bigger than you'd ever want to harvest them for eating. I mean, 18 inches long, 12 to 18 inches long. So they're breaking up the subsurface compaction layer, and they're breaking down in the springtime to feed a lot of microorganisms. So a lot of fun kind of watching those go. And then again, you get a lot of different blooming times with this cover crop diversity. The other one is minimal soil disturbance in the program. This you have to track your tillage practices every time you disturb the soil in this program. So you have to write down the type of soil disturbance. So did you disc? Did you till? Did you field cultivator? What did you use? The date, the location. Why did you disturb the soil? How deep did you disturb the soil? And was it successful? The best part is the bottom part of the question, because it gets you have to answer these questions as a farmer. Were you successful? I mean, was that a good thing? And is there a way to omit this action? And that's really something that we're working with a few different crops on getting into some no-till or reduced till situations. So again, that's all part of the requirements of this program, much different than organic requirements. Compost, manures, fertilizer requirements. Again, there's a big there's a hard line on how much fertilizer and fertility that you can input off your farm. Again, we're trying to create the emphasis is to create fertility on the farm using cover crops and composting, recycling your wastes. So this has been probably one of the biggest changes to our farm. Has been a huge push to basically wean ourselves completely off of any fertilizers coming off the farm. You know, there's tons of products in the organic industry now. People want to sell you everything, you know, all these different types of organic fertilizers and things like that. But, you know, good biological farming, you don't need those nutrient inputs if you can get them from the microorganisms and the biology of your land and recycling of organic matter. So it's really put us in a great kind of more resilient, what I call, you know, climate resilience, more on-farm recycling. So you know, we basically reduced our fertilizer use by 90%. When I talk about fertilizer, organic fertilizers, bags of organic fertilizer, starting in 2017, we just went hard on the recycling. We're lucky we generate you know, our pressed herb material when we make our extract. So we get a free dump load of pressed herbs every couple days, and then we go out and we cut our fields and we mow our grasses. We capture all that and we're recycling it. So this picture back here, that's all our leftover chamomile stems getting mixed in with some herb refuse and manure. And as you look further down the line, it's finished compost. So, and we're just using that all kinds. Once you have that, it's like put it on your fields, use it in your gardens, use it in the greenhouse, make compost teas. I mean, we've had some really great results by increasing our applications of compost in our production. Some other points to be that are really part of regenerative organic certification: deforestation, land clearing is not allowed. So you can't even clear trees to create new fields, things like that. It's not permissible. Water conservation, you have to verify, obviously, irrigation rights, and you actually have to actually log your restoration efforts to conserve and restore wetlands and riparian areas. We've been involved on the West Coast with a group called Salmon Safe since the late 90s, and you know, some of these benchmarks we're using even another third party to help you know, create these benchmarks. So Salmon Safe, we've gone in and done streamside tree plantings. We've planted over 1,000 trees along our streams and creeks, and we've done in-stream restoration by putting logs and creating shade because we have salmon that still spawn in our creeks in our areas. So we've done some in-stream restoration as well, along with tree planting. And then water conservation has to do with reducing the amount of water used over time. And wildlife habitat is another big part of it, insectary strips. This is just a great visual image that I get to see every day when you're doing regenerative farming, this kind of polyculture, you know, when you come around every corner, every field, you get to kind of look out and see, you know, you see some Asclepias for monarch butterflies, you see some, you know, evergreen ground cover, you see some native oaks on the right, you look out and you see some of our crops, you see some grasses. So it's a multifunctional system, and it's really nice. The other program that we've been involved with was Organic Department of Agriculture, another third party, where we actually were part of the Oregon Bee Atlas program for the last 2 years, where we were part of a program where we went out and surveyed native pollinators on our farm, in our fields and in some of our gardens. And we actually helped contribute to basically a statewide pollinator, first time ever species list. We found the program actually found some new pollinator species that were undiscovered. And Herb Pharm, we actually were out of 20 farms, we had the most pollinator species found identified on our farm. I think that has a lot to say about our diversity, biodiversity, and then also our location. We're very in a lot of proximity to a lot of native biodiversity too. So we're working really hard. You really have to understand, you know, if you're doing species assessment, you really have to learn how to identify them. You have to learn what's happening with their populations, and then you have to learn their habitat requirements. So it's a lot of cross training of employees and educational events, and it's been a lot of fun working with that group too. Agroforestry, tree shrub plantings, alley cropping, mulching, these are all other benchmarks for the program. Of course, creating these multi-layers, you know, trees and shrubs where you don't have to work the soil. You're getting a lot of free organic matter. You're providing all this habitat. So a lot there, and there's quite a bit more. There's quite a bit more that I didn't include. There's about 10 other practices you can take on in this program as well. But these are all, you know, these are all requirements. These requirements here, you just have to pick 3 or 4 out of a group of 15. Everything I've talked about so far is a requirement of ROC. And then a big part of what we just were talking about previously is the farmer and worker fairness part of it. Commitment to pay a living wage, or you have to either pay a living wage, which we do at Herb Pharm, or commit to be on that trajectory to pay a living wage. So you have to be working towards that. You have to, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of requirements for creating leadership teams within your field crews, worker empowerment, worker voices. And so there's a lot of checkpoints there for poor agricultural practices, child labor, hiring practices. You have to show documented disciplinary procedures. That employees are able to have representatives, worker voice. Internships are also looked at in this program. If you have internships, if you house workers, that gets audited in this program. Weekly hours is limited to 48 hours a week on the farm. And then they look at your health and safety record. So there's a lot to it. It's a really all-encompassing program, but I do feel like again that this part of it is you know, there's a bigger subject I don't think we'll get into today, but you know, if we're going to heal agriculture, we're going to heal the land, you know, we've got to heal ourselves too, and what we've done in modern day agriculture. So this is really encompasses that part of what we need to get done. So yeah, become a regenerative farmer. I think, you know, if I can say that in the last 2-3 years of me going through the process, there's the challenges that I picked out or thinking about this presentation is scientific communication. It's really hard to communicate, you know, that, you know, farmers can actually make an impact on climate change. That's a huge task. I mean, you know, and to think that we can sequester 50% of our carbon back in our soils is just, it's a pretty immense message to try to get across, and it's going to take a lot of communication from research and these types of activities. It also includes learning new farming equipment, new methods. Some of these I talked about. There's equipment that's involved, like that we're looking at, no-till grain drills, and there's roller crimpers, and there's specific things too that would help with tillage practices as well, reducing your tillage practices. And then the most important one at the bottom, redefining our culture in support of human health and planetary connection. That goes right back to what Ann was saying. I think more than anything right now, we're really at the crossroads of this, you know, how we're going to move forward with all this, because yeah, it's not a pretty picture. You know, you drive across the country, any of us get in our car right now, and you can just see the amount of habitat and destruction that agriculture has put into the land here in the United States. It's displaced most of our native ecosystems and habitat, and that's a really deep conversation because there's a lot involved with redefining our culture. But I've got some suggestions on that too. I won't get into, but anyway, hopefully we'll get into that in discussion. So thanks for listening. I'll be around for questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. And yeah, there's so much more to talk about and explore. One thing I loved was how the way you talked about the ecosystem really illustrated the points about the mindset shift that Bethany mentioned and that you talked about. And so just by doing, like just by stepping in and beginning, it begins that healing of those connections. So it's not just focused on an end product, but really the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, regenerative farm may look totally different than what we're used to in 20 or 30 years. So it's exciting to think about that potential.
So now we want to turn to Tom Leonard, who's coming to us from Gaia Farm, which also probably doesn't need introduction, but in North Carolina. And Thomas Leonard is the farm operations manager. And his focus there is really on eliminating waste, ecological restoration, reducing dependence on inputs, and closing the loop from farm to facility. And like Matt and Bethany, Tom is also really passionate about these issues. He's passionate about social, ecological sustainability, and also on empowering people with disabilities, youth of all ages, and disadvantaged populations to grow plants better. I love that. So welcome, Tom. Look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you both, Matt and Bethany. I really enjoyed both your presentations, and it's really cool to see how parallel all the different organizations in our industry are moving together. And I really think it's awesome that this industry in particular is really doing a better job than what you see in a lot of what you might find in a grocery store or whatnot. But yeah, so my name is Thomas Slater, and I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about Gaia's experience with regenerative agriculture. I'm going to break down my presentation into 3 parts. First, I'll just give you guys a brief history of the company and just make sure you guys are familiar with that. And then the meat of it is really jumping into regenerative practices. And actually, I'm going to go through, I think, about 5 different strategies that we use on our farm. It's just a few of the many, many strategies that we use. And then I want to have a little discussion at the end about the big picture, you know, beyond our farm, and really looking at how Gaia sees our role in the entire regenerative movement across the planet. So here is a picture of our farm. We're located in Brevard, North Carolina. So we're just on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a really beautiful farm. Gaia's history is that we were started in 1986 in Massachusetts, and the company moved to Brevard in 1996, so 10 years into the company's life. And we purchased about 250 acres of land. And so right here at the same property, we have our extraction facilities. We farm 160 acres of actual like square footage of bed space. Then we've got about another 100 acres that we lease, and yeah, it's a really awesome place. Here's the mission of the company. Our mission is connecting plants and people to create wellness. So we're really focused on, we grow 30% of our own raw materials. We source a lot of other raw materials from, you know, a lot of the tropics and other climate areas where we can't actually grow stuff. And we put it into herbal supplement products that are sold all around the country. Here's a map of our farm. Hopefully you guys can see my, no, I don't think, yeah, if you can see my cursor down here, this field down at the bottom, we call this the 8-acre field. And it's actually about 9 acres, ironically. But that kind of gives you a scale of how big our farm is. You can also see here the diversity of different crops that we grow. We grow anywhere between 20 to 40 different crops on the farm. And one really interesting fact about our farm is, I said earlier that we started farming this property in 1996. We've been certified organic with Oregon Tilth that entire time. So we have a lot of history working on this land, and it's really amazing. When I first started at Gaia, I looked at some soil tests and I was like, man, this can't be right. Like the soil organic matter is just off the charts. I didn't even think this was physically possible. I managed a 350-acre farm in Virginia, and my best field on the farm had like 1.9% soil organic matter. And from one lab, they sent us back soil tests that showed we had 20% soil organic matter in fields. And we're right here on the French Broad River, and this is the 2nd oldest river in the world. So, you know, you get in some of these fields, and we had an excavator one day and we dug a hole, and it's just this beautiful black soil, like 6 feet deep. And that's an important part of our farm. I kind of look at us as almost being a regenerated farm. You know, we talk about carbon credits and stuff like that, and it's really going to be hard for us to push the needle any further on that soil carbon. But a lot of that credit goes to some of the previous farm managers. I've only been with the farm for 2 seasons now, and I know there's a couple of them on the call today. So a big shout out to them, and really folks who've been using a lot of really sustainable practices, composting, cover cropping, et cetera, long before I was here. Here's an example of some of our products. And I included this because being a regenerative company is not just about what we do on our farm. That is a huge aspect. Agriculture has a huge environmental impact globally. So being able to control our production really helps us reduce our footprint from the ground level. But I also really appreciate the thought behind sustainability that our marketing team puts into stuff. You know, recyclable bottles. I actually just finished a bottle before this presentation today of one of our products, and it's glass bottle, and I was able to take that, drop it in the recycling bin. There's no plastic band on it or anything like that, and I dropped the top in my plastic recycling. And I really see the regenerative movement. You know, we're a B Corp, and it's really something that's not just the farm's responsibility, but it's our entire company's responsibility. So now I'm going to jump into more of the practical stuff. First, I'm going to share with you guys one of my favorite definitions of regenerative agriculture. And I actually stole this from a webinar that I watched when I first started working at Gaia. And this summed it up so well. I've explained this a couple other times, but I really like this definition. And what they've done here is we've broken down 3 different philosophies of agriculture. So the first one here is extractive, and this is kind of your traditional agriculture. This is where a farmer is trying to exploit the land and extract as much value out of the soil as possible. And it's really just a take thing. You know, forestry is a great example of this. If you're not replanting, you're just coming in, clear cutting and moving on. Then you have this conservative philosophy of agriculture. And with this one, this is kind of what I'd say separates sustainable agriculture from regenerative agriculture. This is where a farmer is doing the right practices and they're trying to minimize their impact. They're trying to not do anything that's horribly wrong for the environment, but they're not really putting a lot more thought in it beyond that, maybe. And the regenerative, or here it's called restorative idea, is this is where you're actually putting more into the soil than you're taking away. You're actually making the soil better from your farming practices. And I really like that. I think it's all about putting in more than you're taking out at the end of the day. This is another infographic that I saw right when I started working at Gaia, and it's a little cheesy, but I actually have this as the background on my desktop because I think it really sums up what this is all about. In the top, you have this example of, you know, clear cutting, and then you have industrial agriculture. Here they're using a bottom plow and flipping over the soil. You can even see the tractors like on a slope. So this is your worst case scenario for erosion. You're gonna see the topsoil wash away in you know, probably less than a decade. And then this farmland's pretty much only good for grazing at best. And most of the grazing practices in our country are fairly, in our planet, are fairly unsustainable. And over a matter of time, that land is just desertified and really not good for anything. But then at the bottom of this, it shows the other side. It shows a symbol of hope. And they have 3 different strategies here that lead to restoration and regeneration and a more sustainable livelihood. And I've broken out those 3 strategies on this next slide, because actually I like looking at this as more of a Venn diagram. But the first one they have on there is erosion control. And that's just keeping your soil in place, keeping it in the field. And we do this through cover cropping, you know, really taking care of our fields. But then we also do this beyond our fields with our riparian buffers and some of the things Matt touched on earlier. Another one on there was replanting. And I really think this is another one that goes all the way from the soil down to the perimeters of our fields. So here we're talking about microbes in our soil, the cover crops and plants that we have on top of our soil, and the grasses and trees and other things that we have on the borders of our field. Now, the third point they have on there is soil restoration. I worked with a consultant this year, and we designed a new potting soil to use in our greenhouse. And my big objective with that was to eliminate extractive resources. I didn't want something with perlite and a lot of other things that are really great for growing plants, but the methods they use to mine these and extract these from the environment are really not environmentally friendly. They're really energy intensive and damaging. So one of John's big things was he was saying, we got to make sure we take care of the physical components of the soil first. So bulk density in our potting mix, compaction would be the equivalent in the field. We're going to look at the chemical requirements. We're going to make sure that we have the fertility that we need in the soil in the optimum levels. We're not going to put in more nutrients than the plant needs. We're really going to try to hit right there at the sweet spot. The third one's biological, making sure you have the bacteria and the fungi and all those microorganisms that are in the soil that really complement the plants well. And the next couple strategies that I go through, a lot of these actually fit right here in the middle. Cover cropping is a great example where we're maybe fixing nitrogen in the soil. We're, providing some biodiversity with the replanting aspects, and we're controlling erosion. I really think that the majority of our actions on the farm, we want them to hit right here in the middle. So this is kind of what our typical rotation looks like at Gaia. Milky oats is one of our biggest crops up here in the right-hand side. So usually we have about 20 acres of milky oats on the farm. So it's a huge component. The other two classification kind of families of crops that I look at are we have a lot of leafy crops. So here we've got a picture of lemon balm, might be feverfew. It's one of these crops that we're going for the aerial parts of the plant, and we're just harvesting the green matter and maybe some of the flowers on the top of the plant. And then we also do a lot of root crops. We do things like Chinese skullcap and Echinacea purpurea. And these are more long-term crops. These are things that we're keeping in the ground for at least 2 years and harvesting the roots. And I think the beautiful thing about that is that each one of these different plants is using different nutrients. We have the milky oats up there where this is really the plants trying to regenerate seeds and express that. So that's the nutrients that we're extracting from the field. We have the leafy crops, so there's going to be a lot of nitrogen that we're taking from the field. And we've got the aerial part, or we have the root crops where there's a lot of phosphorus and potassium and different micronutrients that are going into those roots. And we usually end up breaking up these cycles with the cover crops. So different times of years, we'll use different cover crops. We're not quite as complex as Matt with the 17 different species of cover crops. That's really amazing and really important, because the more diversity you have in your cover crop, the more diversity you're going to have in the microorganisms in your soil. But we're definitely working in that direction. And yeah, so that's a little bit about our crop rotation. Riparian buffers are another one that Matt touched on. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into it here. This is pretty much inspired by the University of Missouri, I believe. They've got some awesome little YouTube videos and stuff and some documents where they break down their concept of riparian buffers. And they do it in this 3-zoned approach where you have zone 1 that you don't really manage at all. It's just a natural area. This is like your heavy floodplain. You have native trees. You want those trees to actually form a complete canopy and touch over the waterway. Then you have zone 2, which is really going to be more of your perennial crops. For our farm, since we're an herb farm, a good example of that would be elderberries. Elderberries can handle a little bit of flooding, and they can kind of be on the edge there. We also have a ton of black walnuts on our farm that naturally grow in this kind of area. And then zone 3 is a vegetative filter strip. So this is an area where you're going to have dense grass maybe, and something that really forms a wall and almost like a toothbrush, and it will filter out any nutrients that might run off the field, whether that's a leaf or a twig or some water with actual soil in it. So this is one thing that we're working towards implementing on our farm, and really targeting the areas where the river comes the closest to the fields, and work on expanding those and really have these different zones really well defined. Another thing that we've been implementing a lot on the farm in the last couple of years is would really fit into all 3 of those categories, but the replanting. We've been planting a ton of different trees. I copied a list of some of the different species on the right side here. We've done somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 trees, I believe, in the last 2 years. These yellow lines represent some of the areas that we've planted on the farm. A lot of these we've done right in the middle of our really large areas of fields, and they serve a ton of different purposes. So it's really hard to point out what the direct benefit is. You know, on one hand, they are providing habitat for beneficial birds and things that really play a big part in our integrated pest management strategy. It's really amazing when you go out there. We stake all of our trees the first couple of years with a piece of bamboo so they don't get mowed over. And you just see underneath the trees on the wood chips that we mulch, there's bird poop everywhere. And that's actually bringing nutrients into our field as well as helping out with the integrated pest management. So that's just one side there where they're fostering biodiversity. And then on another hand, they're helping out with our fertility. These trees, they're going to put roots deep, deep down underground, much farther than a lot of our annual and biennial herbs will reach down to. And they're going to pull nutrients up from that subsoil. And every year they'll drop it in their leaves onto the top of our fields, and it'll be incorporated into those top few inches of soil where our herbs are actually able to absorb it. And then there's a ton of other benefits with you know, we're probably very different than Matt's farm, where we have an issue of having way too much rain often. It's really an issue if the farm goes underwater quite frequently. So our trees are there to really help suck up some of that water and help dry out our fields so that we can get our farm crew back into the field to harvest or do whatever work we need to do. And down there at the bottom, you can see this is a figure that Allison, our sustainability director, helped me pull up, and multiplying the math from the trees that we've planted the last 2 years, we're sequestering annually over 20 tons of carbon. So really a big impact with what we're doing there. This is an organization that I'm really fond of, Contour Lines. I helped one of my buddies that woofed up my farm back in the day start this organization. And there's a picture of Contour Lines project up there in the top corner, where they've actually, in preparing this field for planting, they cleared a lot of stuff and they laid it all down on contour on the field and planted fruit trees and legume trees around the area. And then they'll come back through and they'll continuously cut back those legume trees, which releases nitrogen into the soil, and they'll use the branches as mulch to mulch these fruit trees. And then the people who own the land that they're doing these projects on, they'll actually plant corn the first couple of years in between these contour lines and get an annual income and provide food for their families. These are sustenance farmers. And I love this model because it's using the concept of contour lines here, where they're stopping erosion in the fields. They're also alley cropping, where they're growing multiple crops, similar to the picture at the bottom. They're mulching with trees like we talked about in the last slide. On the left side here, you can see an example of how we're doing very similar things to what Sean's doing on our own farm. There's our ginkgo branches and hawthorn branches that were byproducts of our harvesting. And we actually have taken a few areas on the farm that we don't use very much, that are way too hilly for us to cultivate. And we've deposited those branches on contour. And each year we add to that, and we're breaking down that wood on the property, building soil right there. And I think next spring we'll end up finally getting around to planting these and really just help add to the biodiversity of our farm. So here's one of the implements that we use on our farm. This is, we purchased a Subsoiler right after I first started, and I really, I know tilling's demonized in a lot of ways, but I think this has really given us a lot of beneficial impact. So what we're talking about here is subsoiling, and this is where we're ripping the land and really cutting down a deep trench. The key here is that 18 to 24 inches. You know, typically on our farm, the historical cultivation equipment and tilling equipment that we use wouldn't really go down much deeper than 6 or 8 inches. And with the amount of moisture that we have on our farm, that often causes a hard pan. There's this impermeable surface that develops in the soil, and water and roots can't pass down through that. So what we're doing here is we're digging down deep and we're breaking that up and allowing water to penetrate into the ground so we don't have ponding and puddling on our farm. And we're also allowing the roots of our crops to go down a lot deeper. We've seen a tremendous increase in our annual yields on the farm. And I do think that this is, especially of our root crops, and I do think that this is one of the implements that's facilitated that. The implement we first bought had 2 prongs, 2 shanks about 6 feet apart. And I did learn something the other day that that's not always the best situation. Having prongs that are closer together actually helps you get more horizontal fracturing. And so we actually just bought a pretty affordable piece of equipment. It looks just like this one in the picture. And we're hoping to see really good results from that next year. To quantify this for you, if you think about it, Matt, I think, pointed out earlier that the majority of soil, you know, like 50% of the volume is air a lot of times in an ideal soil. And that's also area that can be filled with water. So if you think about us having only 6 inches where the water can penetrate originally, and now we've gone down to 18 or 24 inches, and 50% of that volume is water, that's a lot of gallons of water that we can keep on our farm and put into our soil each year. I did the math on it, and it's big numbers, really awesome. And the last thing for kind of replanting is soil inoculation. We're not just replanting our beds and our riparian buffers, but we're replanting our soil. We've been a big fan of doing some work with effective microorganisms this year. These are kind of like fermented bacterias and stuff that are really popular, or were kind of first called out with Korean natural farming. And it was great. We had a field this year and we ran out of our tea that we were adding into our transplanter. And we had half the field of echinacea that we had added these microorganisms to and half the field that we hadn't. And we saw a huge difference in growth in the first couple months. So, you know, it's hard to scientifically quantify this without measuring, but you know, you can just see the difference on the field. So that's an anaerobic form of how we might add nutrients to the field, and really a good beginner step. You know, aerated compost tea can be a little bit more complex, and you can really mess it up and actually put some nasty pathogens out into your fields. So we found using some of these products that are out there, we've been able to kind of take baby steps into that and really do an effective job of quality control. You can see this picture on the right side, that's basically bacteria all over the place. And that's what our EM1 looks like when we put it into the field. It looks really great. We also use a lot of compost on the farm and wood chips. You know, I'm a huge fan of the wood chips. You know, you have the compost for your bacteria. If you have a really good compost, you might have a high fungal count in it if it's been resting for a long time. But I'm all about putting wood chips out and using that to help build our soil. And then molasses is another great bacterial food. Here's some of the metrics that we use in our sustainability report to really express what we're doing on our farm and really kind of I'm sorry guys, an opportunity to show the results of all these different practices that we've used. So we're tracking things like our CO2 sequestered, soil organic matter, et cetera, et cetera. So in this last little bit here, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing on our farm, or what we're doing beyond our farm more so. And I've got a quote in here from Allison that I decided when we were kind of brainstorming and talking about this presentation that I really loved and I wanted to keep in here. And it says, "There's no endpoint in sight. There will always be areas of improvement and learning." And I think that's a really important message to capture, that, you know, we're not always going to do everything perfectly. And, you know, there's a lot of these really cutting edge things with soil health and different things were not things that were commonly talked about, you know, 10 years ago. So we're still right here on the brink of really understanding and perfecting agriculture. But I'm also going to break down this section into 3 smaller sections. So we've got education, certifications, and transparency. And that's kind of been Gaia's approach to what we do here. And another quote that I love at the bottom here that we've been, actually we used it in a meeting either today or yesterday. And it says, "We can't ask our suppliers to do something that we're not already doing on our farm." And that's a big thing for us. Our farm's kind of an example of best practices and what we want to see in the world. And, you know, we're not always 100% on it, but we're real close, and education is a huge part of that. So it's not just us learning, but it's also us teaching. It's, you know, educating our consumers and the vendors that we work with. It's bringing students onto our farm and teaching them. It's teaching other people in our organization more about what we do on the farm and helping them understand, you know, why we're harvesting things at certain times of the year, or, you know, some of the other regenerative practices that we're doing that might constrain certain options that we have. Visiting other farms is a huge thing, whether it's another herb farm or another, you know, it could be a soybean farmer. I think you can always learn a little bit about somebody who's got this sustainable mindset, and you can see a lot of different things. So, you know, we're looking at the farms that we work with. I got to go visit one out in Oregon last year, and I had so many aha moments just walking the farm. We didn't really probably teach each other anything overly profound, but there were just little techniques and little strategies that they were using on their farm that really inspired me. And I was able to bring that back, and we're able to share that with my other team members.
I wanted to, because we're coming to the end of the time, so I just wanted to.
Okay, yeah, I've got just a couple more slides.
Yeah.
Okay.
But thank you very much. And I had a quick question, and then I think we have time for one other. I wondered, and I think, Bethany, this is probably mostly directed at you. It's fantastic to hear about everything that's happening on the farm, but these different farms, but in fact, in the whole industry, it's a fairly small percentage of farms that make this, companies that make this investment. And I wondered if you could talk some about, probably many people listening to this maybe work in a company where they want to make these investments, how to make that case for why this is essential, not just because it's important for our ethics, but because it's core business.
Yeah, it's interesting because with MegaFood, we really, at first, I was asked to make the business case, and I had some trouble doing that. But when I dug into it, I mean, we're living in a time when even companies like financial firms like BlackRock are changing companies' risk rates based on, is that company a sustainable company? And what kind of impact are they making? And do they care about their carbon footprint? And so even at the broadest, most capitalistic, traditional structure scales, people are waking up. So what we found was not only our social impact posts that talk about these types of practices and advocacy in general, those are our most highly engaged with posts. But also, when we did some research, market research of all the attributes of like the special things that MegaFood is, what do people care about the most and what do they make buying decisions based on? We found that our advocacy, we had activism, and so exactly how people were defining that might have left some room, but over our certifications, activism, they were more interested in that, and that was more linked to buying decisions. And so I think it depends, you know, on who you're selling to and what your market is, but in this natural space where people care about health and there's a holistic conversation just about, you know, people's health in general and why they would engage with herbal use, I think it's not a big leap to say that that's a similar type of person that we were talking to. And one of the main reasons that I was able to push the company towards looking at regenerative agriculture practices and making sure that we have that in our supply chain was that we ran into specific problems where extreme weather events were disrupting our own supply chain and putting us into back order. We had hurricanes in Florida, so there's certain herbs that we couldn't get because they got wiped out in a hurricane. We had citrus greening ruining some of our organic orange supply chain. So we had results around like these climate pressures that regenerative agriculture actually creates so much more solidity and vibrancy and safety in the farm, because you can take more water and you do better in drought, and you're more resistant to pesticides or to pests, excuse me, when you have more biodiversity. It was like, if we're investing in regenerative folks, we're going to have a more resilient supply chain so that we can continue to do business. And so that was a big part of what ended up, it was like, hey, it makes economic sense because people care that we care about this. We got some initial data from our own consumer base, and then just the hard facts that it's hard to do business with a volatile supply chain. And if we want to keep making products, we're going to need really vibrant supply chain that's using good practices. So that was kind of what the business case looked like for us.
Great, thank you. And then kind of following on that in a way, and Matt, this might be directed to you. Aaron Smith asked if there are particular challenges, or I would also say opportunities, to incorporating regenerative practices into botanicals that are different from the food, you know, growing food products.
I would say that we have a little bit of an advantage because a lot of the herbs, especially, well, particularly herb farm, where we have a really diverse, you know, line of crops that we're growing. Majority of our crops are perennials, so we have a little bit of a soil advantage when it comes to soil disturbance with perennials. We're also growing a lot of what I'd consider non-traditional farm crops, so, you know, more or less taking native plants and propagating them from seed or from cuttings. So there's a lot of opportunity to use more of those types of models to grow these crops in those types of settings. Vegetable farmers typically have shorter rotations, and they usually have to, you know, work the soil more often, maybe, you know, every 45 days, 60 days in a short cycle crop. So there's probably more of an advantage for herbs right now when it comes to regenerative farming, especially when it comes to perennials and a lot of your shrubs and trees that we're also using in the botanical industry. So they really, that really complements, you know, the model. With food farming, I mean, you've got fruit trees and you've got shrubs and polycultures and food forest farming, which could be really advantageous too. But yeah, that probably is about the best I could do on that one.
Tom, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think I really like what he said. I think that's a huge advantage we have, is being able to keep lemon balm in the ground for 3 years, or a lot of our root crops for 2 to 3 years. Really allows the soil to rest and brings in a lot of nutrients, and it's almost like we're leaving the field fallow for a year, as you hear about that with field rotations.
So we're coming to the end of an hour and a half, and I wanted to, there are several questions that Matt and Tom, I know Bethany, you have another meeting. If you all wanted to could stick around and answer, or we can also wrap it up now and I can copy the questions and then we can try and answer them offline. Should we?
I'm flexible either way. I've got plenty of time.
It's
Yeah, I have to jump.
time.
I have to jump, but I see Becca's two questions around like resources for measuring, and if you're not familiar with the Soil Carbon Initiative Index, that's what I would put attention on. It's like a unified global standard that's gone through open comment period and had a lot of people weigh in on it that measures soil health. So we rely on that internally. We encourage and incentivize sometimes our farm partners to use it and to pilot it. So that would be one of the places I would look, and it's a way to measure carbon drawdown. So if you're thinking about insetting and thinking about making claims or anything like that around carbon, that's the place to look. That's the only thing that I would add, but otherwise I've got to run. So thanks for having me, everybody. It's nice to be here.
Joining Bethany. And for we've been an hour and a half. Thank everyone for being here. And we will share a recording of this in a follow-up email. And also that's an opportunity. There'll be a contact there if you have suggestions or follow-up input of webinars you'd like to see moving forward that really address ideas of regenerative practices. So thank you all. And then I'll just, one question that Tom, you touched a little bit on, but I thought it's an important one about machinery on the farm. And they wondered, have any changes been made in types of machines, uses of fuels? And they also wondered if in post-harvesting, if there have been any changes made in processing and packaging. That's a lot of questions in one. So maybe really the machinery on the farm and the fuel, right?
Yeah, we're big on biodiesel at Gaia. So we have lots of really old tractors. I mean, they're much older than I am. We've got tractors, I think, from 49 to 1970 when I first started here at Gaia. And we've bought a few newer tractors, and there's definitely pros and cons to those. You know, some of these newer tractors are not as well equipped to deal with biodiesel. And that's one challenge that we have found with looking into things, and one of the big advantages of some of these older tractors, and that the newer ones have a lot of electronics and stuff like that, where we've really found a lot of opportunities to improve our operation is in the implements, and just making sure that we're using the right tools and adding efficiencies to the farm, as well as reducing the amount of impact we have on the soil. So we're doing a lot of work right now with how we make our raised beds for our herbs, and also with the different implements that we have for tillage, because there is some level of soil disturbance that we're going to have to do on our farm with the types of crops that we're growing. But our goal is to really just minimize the impact, and then also recolonizing that soil with beneficial fungi and bacteria as quickly as possible.
Matt, do you have anything you want to add about machines?
Yeah, I can add a few things that we've learned along the way and where we're kind of moving towards. One thing is, and it may not make sense for everyone, but if you can, we've increased the amount of row crop spacing we can cover, and then so if you're a row crop farmer and you are doing row crop farming, you can, if you can do, if you're set up for 2-row equipment, if you can set yourself up for 4-row or 6-row equipment, that's just less time that you need to spend on the tractor. You can reduce your tractor usage and fuel usage in half if you can, if you could row crop, 4 rows at a time versus 2 or 8 rows. So again, you have to be careful, because bigger equipment can also cause more compaction at the wrong times of year. But that's one way to look at it. It doesn't seem, always to make total sense, but increasing the size of your equipment, or even even something as simple as mowing like a cover crop down. If you can, a lot of tractor mowers are standard 5-6 feet, but if you can if you can invest in a larger mower, 12, 15 feet wide, then, you can do what you can do in 3 passes in one. So that type of investment over time really reduces the amount of time that you're spending on your tractor and that you're, fueling up in the fields. And yeah, there's a whole slew of things that will cause you to be on the tractor more often than not. But if you're really efficient with what you're doing with your tractor, I think that's the main thing. You really have to be as efficient as possible. Look at each task independently and try to figure out a way, how can I reduce either the use of this tractor or the time that I'm using it. So another one that I can't speak on behalf of personally because we haven't tried it yet, but I'm really excited to get into some no-till drilling because the fall is a big time where we are, using a lot of, like Thomas said, we are having us turn our fields either in the spring or fall to a certain extent, a small percentage of annuals that we want to plant into a cover crop. So again, we don't have the equipment right now. We have to prep the soil bed to get a good cover crop stand and things like that. But with a no-till drill, you should be able to eliminate a lot of tractor tillage work in the fall time, or even in the spring if you're doing some plantings like that. So those are the types of things, because tillage is a, and Thomas would probably know this too, that's a lot of time on the tractor. It takes a lot of time to get your soil prepped if you're a tillage farmer. So again, reducing your tillage, going to no-till for certain crops is going to make a big impact. So
Great, thanks. There's another machinery question around what tractor tools have you found most effective to gather agriculture biomass for composting?
I could just jump in, and we use a silage chopper or a forage chopper. Works really well for, especially for like sorghum or Sudan grass that grows really 8-10 feet tall, and it can be really difficult. And again, a lot of forage silage choppers usually have a side delivery system, so it can fill a trailer up. And again, you can for the type of farming where if you're less than 5 acres, then you can do things more by hand or manually. But when you're trying to move that, and anybody, as we all get older and things, just we're trying to think of ways to use our bodies less and rely on equipment. So yeah, silage chopper with a hydraulic trailer works really great, or a forage wagon that has the ability to deliver the material from the field into your compost area. But yeah, forage silage chopper with a wagon is about what we use.
Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
We don't really have a lot of practices of removing material from the field other than what we're harvesting. We definitely try to leave as much stuff in the field as we can. Yeah, so that's currently what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Great. So one question I have when I see all those trees planted too, that I wondered, simple one, how do you irrigate your trees? Tom, that's for you.
We're really lucky that we've only irrigated a couple days of the 2 years that we've planted trees. And what we're literally just putting a IBC tote in the back of a pickup truck. And I've got an adapter that can hook it up to a hose so we can just drive through and shoot some water on each plant quickly. But we mulch all of the trees to help reduce the soil drying out when we plant. So that's one of our strategies to minimize the amount of water we need.
Great. And then one last from Ed Fletcher. He wanted to know if any of your farms are offering farm credit or carbon credits.
We've been looking into the process a good bit. And like I said, we have really good soil organic matter already. So if Gaia had jumped on that in 1996, we might have made a lot of money on it by now. But so we're still talking to some organizations. I think we're definitely going to dive in and pick a company in the next year or two and just get involved with the program so that we can help a lot of our partner farms navigate that space. And if we ever farm in the other areas, we'll be able to really kind of start from the ground and build it up from there.
Not at this time. Hi, Ed, and great question. Thanks for the for that. I don't, we're not doing that at this moment, but something that definitely piqued my interest. Just, but we're not participating right now.
Okay, and here's a very specific one, but by Nancy Reed asking about jumping worms, which ruin the topsoil. She's in an area where there's an epidemic of them. And she wondered if either of you had suggestions for mitigating this type of damage to the soil.
Unfortunately, I can't share any direct experience with dealing with that pest in particular, so I wouldn't have any practical advice on that.
Yeah, and likewise, we've got a major armyworm problem that we've been battling the last couple of years in our greenhouse. And we use BTs, we use a bacteria pesticide that can help with that. And there's a couple other spinosad that we've used. Those worms can really be devastating, but integrated pest management, I'd say, is the best step, really researching the life cycle of that insect and understanding it and trying to break that if it's a reoccurring problem.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think we can wrap it up for now, but thank everyone for joining and for so many of you sticking on for almost going for 2 hours. So clearly there's a lot of interest, especially in this level of information around farming practices. And so again, if you're interested in seeing more of this kind of thing, if you can just get in touch with me on the Sustainable Herbs Program website to sort of let me know what scale of information would be useful, yeah, to really help carry this momentum forward to get more botanical ingredients sourced in ways that are regenerative. So thank you all. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Van. Thanks, Anne. Appreciate it.
Thanks.